and we'll take it away.
And Ellis, will you be able to help me with some breakout rooms during this presentation?
Do you need to create breakout rooms?
Yeah, just at 2 points.
I actually don't know how to do that. I'll see if we have someone who can help. Give me one second.
Otherwise, if it's, we can figure it out.
I think we may have to go without. We had another presentation where we were trying to figure that out, and we were told that it creates lots and lots of headaches.
Got it. Okay. So we will do something different. Are people seeing my screen?
We have you in a sort of like hybrid view where we see the next slide. Is that the view you intended?
No, we don't want that one. So display settings. How about that?
Beautiful.
Okay. Oh man. Goodness. Welcome everyone. I am going to practice a little mindfulness tool that I have adopted from Dr. Sam Heimelstein, who is he's at the Center for Adolescent Studies in California. He's a adolescent substance use specialist, but he has an acronym, and of course we all have tons of them, but this one I like. It's called TAP. And so the first part is just, the T stands for take a moment, just breathe and pause. The second part is just to acknowledge, what emotions might be coming up, whether for yourself or you're empathizing with other folks in the room or in your space. And P is for proceed, in that we are going to take our next step. So I would invite you all to practice that today. I know I'm just about over the whole Zoom thing, but continues to be our way to share information and collaborate and practice community care. And so I'll take it, but I would so welcome being able to be in person to some of these, and I hope that's coming soon. So I thought today, I work here at the ESD 105 in Yakima. I'm a licensed mental health therapist and a trauma-focused therapist for over 20 years. And for a while now, we've been working on, educating and increasing our awareness around ACEs. And as we wandered our way or languished our way through this pandemic, I recognized, I think it will be helpful to go to that next step, and we can start talking about benevolent childhood experiences or positive childhood experiences. You might have heard both those terms, or you might not have. But how can we now take this information around ACEs and move forward and see if there are intentional ways that we can support children and families in our communities. And I think it's really relevant right now, especially after what Chrissy was just sharing, and that might be familiar to the landscape in your community, with just seeing sort of that universal tier 1 student. Really, people were using the term
regression. Do you need some notice?
I'm not sure. I would
say go
regression,
this way.
But I would say, that people are definitely seeing overarching, a universal necessity for sort of reacquainting ourselves to how to be social and how to work within certain routines and schedules. And as Christy had referenced, maybe it hasn't been this much of a lift or an ask since kindergarten. So I think we've all found ourselves kind of figuring out, from the fear of missing out to the fear of going out, FOGO, as some of my teens remind me. So, so today I think we're going to do a quick review of ACEs and the impact, the overlay of the COVID and the continued pandemic, and then really look at our benevolent childhood experiences and how we can bring that into our school communities in really intentional ways. And if we won't be able to do breakout groups, I will count on you, I hope, to either participate through chat, and I'll try and check it, and so will, I think, my friend Ellis, and then also just say something, so that, we're not just sitting here. I know it's hard in these groups to feel bold and brave and say something, but please do. So for me, it's been very helpful and very refreshing to have my focus shift to benevolent childhood experiences, because it's really given us some data, some neuroscience, some research to help us understand, how we go about building healing and resilience in children. And I think right now, I like this quote from an article from the American Association of Pediatrics, but the concept of drawing on positive relationships as a shield against the toxic stress caused by adverse experiences has never been more relevant. And of course, I think we can all relate to that as sort of a system our own personal nervous system level and the larger systems that we interact with. So right now, really, I think our nation's children are suffering, both this mental health crisis, or just, I would just like to say it's more our awareness of it. And so it's risen to the top, which I love that is top of mind right now. How are we doing? And the merging here, the intersection with our educational challenge all throughout this global pandemic. So the basis of this entire presentation is making sure that children have someone, a positive person they can trust and turn to that has a nurturing relationship that really creates a felt sense of safety, right? That relational safety piece. We all go through life, either masking or code switching at different times. This is how I present when I'm with these people. This is how I present when I'm with this group. And some of it is necessity, our wearing our professional hat or our teacher hat or our expert hat, whatever it is. But, really for our children and ourselves, finding that place where you have relational safety, you can be who you are authentically and genuinely is tantamount to feeling safe, to having ourselves regulated and being able then to access all the learning and situations around us that we need to respond to. So I feel like this is really good news. I don't know about you all, but I can think back to, I think the year was about 2006, and I went to my first ACEs training, and I just thought, well, okay, this, of course, this makes wonderful sense, and thank you for doing this work and presenting it to me. Well, what am I supposed to do exactly? The children I was seeing in a community mental health organization here in Yakima had obviously been impacted by traumatic experiences and early adversity, and it was it was in themselves, it was in around their environment, and I really felt a little bit like, okay, I need to know this, but now what do I need to do? And I feel like benevolent childhood experiences really can give us a way to intentionally promote in a system-wide, in your school system, and in an individual way, how to build a sense of well-being to respond to trauma and stress. That feels like a useful thing to have right now. So I'd like to encourage us to practice in our time together this courageous conversation norms, which is simply do your best to stay engaged. I'm sure most of you are on your lunch at some point or doing something, so have camera off if you need it on, if you could. Recognize you might experience some discomfort. Maybe there's something you disagree with or never thought that way, and it brings up some emotion for you. Just recognize that, right? And if we're having difficulty with conversations or having some discomfort, that's to be expected these days, I think. And speak your truth, meaning, in this space here, please, if you have something to contribute and needs to be said, we would all welcome it at any time. And then this is always a hard one for me, but expect and accept non-closure. Often, life is messy. Working with humans, large and small, is messy. There isn't just, oh, we've closed this loop and everything is fine and we're moving forward. That it continues to have bumps in the road, and things will spike or bubble up and then return down. And so we just need to accept that as part of our journey and welcome it, really, right? It's always information, right? It's always more for us. So we're going to take a moment just to review the adverse childhood experiences. I'm sure you're familiar with them, but it's always kind of fun to have it back in the top of our mind and look at the ways in recent years they began to widen that lens of what does qualify as an adverse childhood experience, taking it away from the 1996 view. And then consider it, how that might be showing up in our families and ourselves during a global pandemic. Then we're going to define our BCEs and positive childhood experiences. Part of our difficulty, I think, is we have all these acronyms and we need a common language. So I'm hoping today we can take away some common language. And then, of course, how we could actually integrate the benevolent childhood experiences screening tool, some of the questions into our school system so that we can counter the impact of ACEs, right? And that would be a thing that we could all work together on. What I wanted to start with, though, first was, kind of check in with everyone and see how we are doing. And since it is incredibly challenging to do a breakout room, we won't have that opportunity. But even though we don't know each other, if we just take a moment to reflect, and using those courageous conversation norms, being bold and being curious. Think about right now, what's your number one priority right now in your work as it's related to your school community? Maybe it isn't related to your school community. What do you want to do less of or more of this week? It's only Tuesday. How do you want to feel? And how are you going to get yourself to help feel this way? How are you going to nurture that and support it? And if you get sort of stuck somewhere, how are you going to remember what's going to boost you and bump you out of that? So I'll just leave these up here for a moment since we don't have that opportunity to go into a breakout group. But if anyone is feeling like I would like to say something, take a moment, right? And I think one thing I do want to honor and respect is our work, I think, is done right now at a breakneck speed, right? We all feel like we've got to respond. So take your time. We're all getting better at sitting with silence in these Zoom meetings, right? So let's do it together. I can start us. I see. Ellis, are you helping monitor the chat?
There is stuff in the chat. Yes.
Wonderful.
I'm not Ellis, excuse me.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Whoever is helping with the chat. Thank you so much. Toggling between the two screens and the kind of temperamental mouse might be beyond me, my capacity right at this moment. But
I'm happy to read things aloud in the chat if you'd like.
I would love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You have to hopefully give me some grace here. We're trying to prevent our breakout rooms from closing in the next 3.5 minutes, but our colleague who made them is in a different Zoom meeting, so my brain is scrambled. But I will say one thing personally, I'm want to do less of is stressing about not having worked harder. I think I got good at it sometime during the pandemic, and then I got less good at it. But Amy shared, I'm sorry, am I skipping one? Number one priority from Lane is supporting our districts with building and sustaining relationships with community partners. Excellent. Lauren says, number one priority is creating a safe space for students. Jennifer shares, looking forward to opportunities like this to build hope and refocus to prevent burnout and get energized. I see self-care. This week, wanting to feel balance, reunifying families.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Ellis. I'll let you get back to not letting our rooms close down. Thank you so much for that. Yes, I loved all the words I heard. Re-energizing, restoring, hope, balance. I'm a huge proponent of naps, right now. I feel like we just got all amped up and have been working at a breakneck speed. And I just like to take a moment and step out if I can. And I know that's not everyone's, it's impossible for everyone, but I'm prioritizing that right for this week. So we're going to move on from breakout groups. So I'm sure you're familiar with this, but just so we can remember, I think it's helpful when we're thinking about adverse childhood experiences, just to think about how those early experiences of adversity really shape the brain architecture of someone and their worldview, right? And you take that with you. And this, as you know, these can be experiences that are pre-verbal. These are stored on a cellular level, right? On an ancestral level, if you think about it. And so those really guide how we see the world and our responses to it, right? And of course, the ACEs study was important, and it was the first time people ever started thinking in a bigger, more whole way about what is causing, risk, right, for these physical and emotional health problems when typically, many of us know, oh, this would not be useful for me to do, and yet we end up doing it. So I always appreciate that the original ACEs study really was able to stop, certainly the medical community for a moment and say like, whoa, let's take a look at what else might be going on. So really, having an experience of trauma means that, your nervous system gets uniquely designed for what you've experienced and could possibly be set on high, in that it's going to recognize just almost any situation as the default setting is going to be, this is threatening or dangerous, right? Because your brain is a meaning making machine, right? And it's going to, its number one priority is, I got to keep you alive every day. So it is going to take those early experiences, early information, and say, this is how I think it might be helpful for your brain to be organized if you'd like to survive in this world, right? And especially I want to point out, that it emphasizes this idea that anything new or novel. Okay, thank you. And we're seeing that our rooms are going to be closed, but then reopened. No worries. Anything new or novel. Are we all still here?
I believe we're all still here. Something
Okay.
popped up on my screen that says keep breakout rooms open, and I clicked on it, so we might actually be okay.
You are the best. Thank you. Okay,
I'm not the best, but I'm here. I'm what you got.
You're my very best friend right now. So anything new or novel then would be interpreted, right, or perceived as a dire threat. And when I think of all our new students returning to school, or our new kinders, our new preschoolers, and you think of this new experience of what a school system might look like after being sort of in a quasi lockdown situation, depending on where you're living for the last 19, 20 months, very much would see your brain recognizing it that way. So of course, the primal way that we can respond to this is having some sense of relational safety, right? And then we can actually absorb that felt sense of safety, right? And again, that's going to be on a cellular level. That is going to be there to help keep our brain from going into fight, flight, or fright, and just staying present and feeling safe. So I do believe that these benevolent and positive childhood experiences will directly build that sense of safety and healing then, right? When we think about responding and moving forward from whatever traumatic events or early adversity you might have experienced. So of course, back in 96 and 98, CDC, Kaiser Permanente published this groundbreaking study on 17,000 adults. And we do want to note that of those adults, they all had insurance. So we're going to, they had Kaiser Permanente insurance. So we can make some assumptions there that they were probably middle class. Typically, I think I've seen now that they were typically middle class white adults. And then they were given these 10 questions to see what they had experienced before the age of 18. And I know some of the criticism around ACEs, or some of the wonderings around ACEs, well, this is retrospective. We're thinking back to our experiences at 18. But the study did show, and continues to show, there's a direct correlation between ACEs, these early adverse experiences, and risk for future health complications. Of course, you had these 10 areas of childhood trauma, and these are the original ones. We're definitely going to get to our newer way of conceptualizing and thinking about ACEs. And in these 10 ways, we have physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, both emotional and physical, interpersonal violence. Right there, they use the term battered mothers. We would think interpersonal violence, right? Incarcerated family member, caregiver with mental health, divorce and separation. Some of these you can imagine would show up in a more common way, and some you would hope wouldn't be that prevalent. However, the study showed the opposite, showed that these were incredibly common, many of these situations, and really interrelated, right? So if we think then about looking at the ACEs information, and we think of an individual, and they're living in a world that might be constantly in a state of commotion and chaos and stress, and that's shaping their understanding of the world. We know that if you're in that emotional part of your brain, it is impossible to be present, right? To learn and attend to information, or to be responsive in a skillful way. If any of you have ever been in an argument with someone and been flooded or felt activated by strong emotions, you realize you might not have been able to respond at your best while you were in that place until you could get more tethered and grounded. I think it also really can contribute to a feeling of just a complete powerlessness and hopelessness. And just being in that place where it's exhausting all the time to be constantly scanning for danger and threats and waiting to be able to respond. I know once working with a second grader, he said to me, quite frankly, he wasn't really buying into my shtick at the time, I don't think, that you know, I kind of sucked, the whole school sucked, the world sucked. What's the point? And this was an 8-year-old. And when I thought about what he'd experienced and what he had seen and what was modeled for him, it made sense that that would be a place he would rest in. And so once your body and brain just aren't registering safety, threat is your default setting, we can imagine then that that nervous system response is pretty jangly, right? And I like to think of the way our nervous systems align with other people's nervous systems and systems, you know, the school nervous system, right? When we come into that, you know, and what does that feel like? You know, I don't know if you've ever entered a meeting and you're feeling good and you've had a good morning and you arrive in there, but there's something in the atmosphere in the room that feels a little off, you know, and immediately you go into like, okay, what could this be? You know, already your brain is processing. This operates on a subconscious or a conscious level, but it's there. And I think we need to recognize that our nervous systems align with everything else around us. And I'm always curious, you know, often we talk about ACEs, but we've never really actually taken the screener or had it presented to us, perhaps in our medical clinic or in another community setting. So I'd encourage everybody to go ahead and be familiar with the screener. Obviously, I've got it here. And then I also want you to be cautious about how you use it. There's some nice guidelines that came out about, you know, using it intentionally so that we aren't re-traumatizing or we are using it in an intentional way about how we share it.
Go in, edit the setting tomorrow. So at least
so that would be something I would encourage you to look at if you have a moment. You know, we do in my clinic here in Yakima, we have been using the ACEs screener embedded in our clinic at the pediatric clinic at every 18-month well child visit. We have another one earlier that looks at some social determinants of health, some of the ways how families are navigating their social and environments. But we've been able to use it more intentionally with some real intense training of all our staff and just the format that we're using, paper versus on an iPad. So here is sort of the updated triangle of ACEs, which I think is how many of us are first introduced to it. And what they've added here, of course, thank goodness, is recognizing the generational embodiment of trauma, historical trauma, so intergenerational trauma, all along the very bottom line there, right? And that, of course, feeds into whatever social conditions and local context might be happening within your community, right? Then when we get to those very specific adverse childhood experiences within your family home, your culture of family, it looks at those. What we know then is due to that, often children will present at our schools with disrupted neurodevelopment, right? You know, that's another way of saying, you know, maybe their needs had not been met, and there were places where they did not receive the robust parenting and nurturing that they needed to be able to come into a social setting, a classroom, with developmental expectations that they wouldn't be quite there yet, right? So then we know if those continue, we could look at having those risks for social, emotional, and cognitive impairments. I'm thinking right now, I was in a district the other day and in their preschool, which had 26 slots, and these were 3- and 4-year-olds, first time into preschool, they had over 19 entering with an IEP or individualized education plan, meaning that they had already been diagnosed with something that was not quite developmentally on track. And I have not seen that before to that level. And so I'm very curious to see, you know, how this continues, you know, as we navigate through this pandemic and what this looks like for us as we get to use those early interventions, right, to help promote, you know, our way out of this, honestly. When we talk about adoption of health risk behavior, you know, then I'm always thinking about, you know, okay, so if you are having some difficulties, social, emotionally, cognitively, how did you cope? You know, what mechanisms were available to you to help you deal with it? You know, anyone talking to any teenager knows right now, if they are in a place of high anxiety, and really intense emotions that feel very, very difficult and painful, they will do anything they can, right, to mute those or dial them down, right, so they're not feeling that. And so that can look like ways that we think of, that are not healthy ways to cope, but are definitely ways to cope. From substance use to, I had one young man say to me last week, if my bed were a person, I would marry it. I just want to sleep my way through this. That is my only way out right now. And I can appreciate that right now. And then of course, those, adoption of possible health risk behaviors for coping skills, lead on into more difficulties, right? We're just piling on then with social problems, disease, disability. We know the pathway within schools, if you are actively using substances, that we have attendance problems, right? We have difficulty learning, difficulty showing up, difficulty with our social relationships. It all feeds into one another. And I think our latest data, and this probably isn't news to you, but shows that there can be a 20-year difference if you have or if you are at risk of ACEs of 4 or more, right? As if they are unaddressed and you are coping in ways that have not been able to be supported within your community and your medical and other informal supports. So that's a lot.
Hey, Mary.
So, yes.
There's a question. Excuse me. There's a question in the chat where we could find a screener, or if there's some of some reliable ones on the internet, maybe.
Yes. Yeah. So I think we go back. I tried to upload. Again, sort of newish to some of these ways, but perhaps someone could copy it and post it in the chat. But that is directly to your ACE questionnaire right there. And so that might prove helpful. Yeah, just to look at it. I mean, many of us talk about it without ever having taken the time to really look at it and see what it looks like. And then there are, other screeners that incorporate pieces of the ACE that are used in different medical settings that we could I could probably find and post on one of the websites here for the convention as well. Thank you. That's helpful clarification. Thank you. And here, anyone seen this one? Anyone seen this tree where I love that we are now looking at, what's clinging to the roots of our tree, right? If our tree is growing and thriving and blossoming, or if it is not. And I think recognizing then, of course, because people always say to me, I mean, if you think about it and you look at those original 10 ACEs, you're like, well, how come poverty isn't on there, or homelessness? And you think, yeah, how come? And I think they just sort of thought of those as sort of background information. But now we realize that all of this feeds into the environment that we are raising ourselves and our children in, right? So poverty, systems of oppression and discrimination, community disruption. If you live in a community that has, challenges with gang activity or high crime rate, or inability to have quality housing, just neighborhood violence, and then systems that are designed to keep certain of us away from opportunity and economic mobility and social capital. And those are all present right now in our communities. So recognizing how these play into those more specific and more within your family community, I think is really important when we're talking about ACEs now, that we've enlarged this and expanded this to this view of our community, right? And that really then it calls us all to action. It gives us a place of like, okay, well, we can do something. These are, we can look at where the energy is coming from that's sustaining these systems and do something. So I feel like it offers us some hope in that way as well. So this is all to be said then, that ACEs are incredibly common, they're incredibly powerful, and they're interrelated. And I think what I love about the Becca conference, or any large conference like this, is this idea that we are promoting our interdependence, right? I know in our society in general, we're thought of as a very individualistic, American society, as you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you alone succeeded and pulled yourself this way through. And when we think of a more collective, shared way of looking at this, we are all interdependent, right? This idea of none of us are well until all of us are well is the way I like to think about it. So this is how we're looking at it. And then if we take a moment to take this information about ACEs and sort of metabolize it or process it, however you do, so that, when you are with a person, it can ping your radar, right? You can be curious when you hear something that might recognize that. So then we can start looking at it in a more holistic way and looking at how our community can be helpful there. And then, again, I think it's really helpful to stop us from going into a place of like, well, I mean, all this has already happened to him. How am I supposed to do anything now? What do I do? This is something that's happened in the past. How do I move forward from this? And so that the benevolent childhood experiences really can give us a way not to balance or neutralize some of those ACEs, right? And to help us feel like we have some agency, right? We can do something here. So here's a question, since we got going to breakout rooms. So feel free to jump into the chat or say something. But what do you think? Do you think looking at and possibly that more encompassing view of ACEs and looking at the community ACEs as well, do you think then those can reliably predict risk for physical and mental health difficulties? And then, I mean, what do you think? Sometimes I think we just make assumptions like, well, of course, this is what we're just going to assume. We all believe in this, but do we? So.
I mean, I'm inclined to think so, if for no other reason than it being interpreted as like an aberration from sort of like mainstream, like what's expected, what kind of formative experiences you're supposed to have that then shape your mind. And unfortunately, your body would seem as well. So I would say so.
Thank you.
I studied humanities though, so.
Yeah, no. Thank you for studying humanities. That's a beautiful way to reframe everything we've been talking about. Absolutely. Just this recognition that if something was aberrant or activated in your body, in your system, a response that would not be shared by hopefully everyone, but is meant to keep you safe and functioning. That's something that's a helpful way of thinking about it and looking at it.
We have some things in the chat as well, if you'd like me to read. I'm sorry.
Please. Yes.
I've just lost where they are because my mouse is too sensitive for scrolling. Oh yes, here we go. We need to take protective factors into account as well. I think they can contribute to challenges, but we know that kids with many ACEs can also be resilient. Yes, but environment and positive relationships and support play a big role as well. Absolutely. What can we do? Early intervention in relationship, agreements around proactive versus reactive. I personally think that the word we need to debate is reliably. I've known people who don't have high ACE scores that are experiencing what you're talking about, and people who have high ACE scores who are living very productive lives. Excellent point. ACEs can cause physical and mental coping mechanisms that negatively impact child's decision-making skills.
Yep.
It can predict what coping mechanisms are used.
Excellent. Yeah, and I love
much
that.
More that I can't keep up with.
No, you guys are fantastic. And I really appreciate holding space for that idea of reliably, right? So what are the differences, right? This is where I've always thought we don't quite have the research, when we talk about resilience, like how come this one did okay with these quote ACE scores, and yet this one, continues to struggle or struggled mightily, and so that's part of what I think we're going to be able to break down when we talk about those preventative and positive factors within this framework of benevolent childhood experiences. Yeah, so I think we're walking the journey together here. Thank you, guys. Is there anything else, Ellis, that is needed in the chat right now before we just segue into COVID and trauma?
Yeah, there's a little bit more in here for sure. Let me see where I left off. Yes, ACEs can be predictive, but we have to look at resilience protective factors. They make a huge difference. I'm also wondering a lot about students who still find themselves in families that are not able to be supportive. I don't know how to support the families and the kids at the same time when families are not super receptive to the school. Another comment, I also think that it is, I also don't think that it is the end all to be all. I feel like ACE scores are often used against young people, and that is not fair. Their story is not written, and we need to not write it for them. Many youth with ACEs also lack the support to get care for their mental health difficulties. Small comment.
Yeah, and great point that, you know, that ACEs are not, they might predict risk, right? But they are not, you know, your future written in stone. Absolutely. And I think, and this is where I see the movement shifting. I do think, you know, in the early 2010s, you know, whatever, the ACE movement was very much like, we have to know about this. We have to, you know, and everything has to be screened through this lens. And then, oh my gosh, these, you know, what's going to happen? This is so much to overcome. And recognizing now that there are formal and informal ways that people navigate their situations, right? And certainly looking at, you know, relational supports and different ways that we can access all the positive and protective factors within a school system, or you know, if we, you know, look around in our community. But absolutely, yeah. Yes, yeah, I think, yes, you guys are all brilliant. Holy cow. So when I think about, you know, sort of now that it's 22 months along here in our COVID experiences and in a pandemic, you know, 5 areas popped up. And this is also taken from some of the work of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. If any of you follow him, The Body Keeps the Score. He's one of our huge people that, you know, discussed the idea of well, first of all, it was helpful in actually getting the diagnosis of PTSD recognized, but recognizing how trauma really gets woven into your system, but also very much how you can, you know, buffer the impact of that. But I think about when I look around in our schools and I look at our teachers and our students, you know, the impact of that year of isolation, you know, it depending on where you were and what was going on, it could have been pretty profound, right? And that could be actual real physical isolation, like you didn't leave your home or your 2 acres out there, or just, you know, feeling lonely and isolated, you know, because maybe you worked from home the entire time, or you only worked on the one day where you're allowed in the office and no one else was there, and, you know, all of that. So very real sense of isolation. And I think if we think about how fear changes the way our brain works, right, which is what we're talking about when we think about early adversity and how our brain gets wired, think of just a constant stream of news that we have been bombarded with through social media, regular news, and how we had to take care at some point, right, to limit ourselves. That I just can't keep looking at this anymore. You know, there's too much to take in. So I think that can feel very isolating as well. Definitely talk to families that were really feeling, especially families with young children, that sense of immobility in that, you know, play groups. For us over here, most of our play groups are still remote. And a play group with a toddler remotely is a very different challenge, right? You know, so that you were just, sometimes you were in your space for a very long time. And we know just from all sorts of different, you know, studies, you're just stepping outside, getting fresh air, seeing green trees, interacting with somebody, just some of those casual interactions you have from the grocery store to the coffee bar to your work person as you pass them in the hall, really gives us a, you know, can lift us up, right? Really can help. And so when I think of that sense of immobility, not being able to access your gyms and your classes and your cooking groups and your book clubs the way you used to, that was part of it. And certainly for all of us, those unpredictable schedules, and for our teachers and all of us working within schools, just this idea that we had to be ready to pivot on a dime. You know, I don't think we're all meant to just keep pivoting all the time. We were feeling dizzy and definitely a cognitive load there, and that we were always having to be flexible, change it up. Okay, this is happening now. We're switching it. For those of us that worked that way, but then also for our littles, if you're working from home and you had your children in your school, in the school setting in your home, you know, it was very difficult to maintain a predictable and regular routine. And we know, again, on a very cellular, level, you know, knowing what's going to happen next can help keep our anxiety down and gives us a sense of like, oh, okay, I can take a breath because I know what happens now. Oh, this is familiar to me, right? It takes away that idea of something novel coming at you all the time, triggering, you know, or activating a threat response. Whew, and this far in, I know I can't think of a family I work with right now that hasn't been touched by significant grief and loss. And that can be from the loss and death of a loved person in their family and in their larger community to sort of this ambiguous loss of like, well, I thought my life was going to look like this, and now this is how things are going. And so I know, you know, especially with this sort of uncertainty that we have right now, and it feels unending. It's a lot for everyone. So that is certainly a way that our brain has had to adjust itself. And so we're back again to safety, right? And whether this is actual real safety, you know, that you are not safe in your home setting or in your school setting or wherever you happen to be, or it's just that perceived sense of loss of safety, that the world, you know, doesn't feel safe anymore. When I think of our 8th graders right now, and they're always talking to me about, you know, the climate change and capitalism. And I'm so glad they're looking at all this, of course. And you know, the COVID and not being able to see their grandmother. And you just think, wow, that is a lot for a 13-year-old to show up and take on in this world right now. That is taking up a lot of space in their brain, right? And you can just imagine where it does not feel safe in physical ways and in perceived ways for our future. So I'm thinking, when I think about ACEs, I think about our current condition in the pandemic. I'm thinking of it all kind of layered in together, right? I found this to be helpful when I was talking to one of our pediatricians in the clinic. And you know how they open the door and they come in if you go to a clinic and they say, how are you doing? Or how are you? They've stopped saying that, because what is our typical response to that? Because we've been socialized to do this. Fine, good, I'm okay. You know, how are you? I'm going to switch it back. So they've just started opening with, how have you been managing? Right? We're all just acknowledging as we meet with someone, it's been hard. The struggle is real. How are you managing right now? And I think that is a lovely way to approach anybody at this time, any of our families. What has it been like for you in the last 2 months, 1 month, year, whatever you're looking for? I begin to start when I'm sitting in on any meeting with a family. That's my first question, right? I just want to hear from you. I definitely want to elevate, you know, the family's voice in whatever meeting I'm in with the school. But I want to hear how have you been experiencing this, your child, the school, all of it, your world. So here we go then. Taking another tap moment for myself, take a deep breath, acknowledge how I'm feeling. I wish I could see you all and manage this better, but and then moving forward. We're gonna think about all this. Now we've got all this kind of swirling around in our background. We're nodding. We've got some agreement. We've got some great wonderings. We're curious. We're gonna sit down and look at, you know, how do we then design benevolent childhood experiences within a school setting. And of course, you gotta love the Princess Bride, but I'm always thinking, you know, there's so many of these terms, right? You know, that I'm not sure we've really defined well, and sometimes they're used, you know, interchangeably, and I'm not sure that's the best way to do it, right? So, you know, ACEs, I think we can all define now. We've got a pretty good idea about adverse childhood experiences, trauma, and we're thinking about those early adversity experiences shaping our brain. Benevolent childhood experiences, we've just defined, we're about to define. Positive childhood experiences, that's actually another screening tool. It looks a lot like benevolent childhood experiences, but not. Resilience, we talk about building resilience. And you know, I had a mom say to me the other day, people keep telling me I'm so resilient. Forget that, I don't want to hear that anymore. I don't want to hear how resilient I am. And then grit, I mean, that's always been a term, or recently, I'd say within the last 10 years, it's being thrown around a lot. And I'm still not completely clear on what that means. Does anyone have a really good definition of grit they want to share that's used within your understanding and in your school community or with the families you work with? If not, I'll keep hunting. Anything in the chat that tells us?
I keep being on the wrong computer at the wrong time. Power through, tenacity, determination.
I like those. Yeah.
Stick
Powering
to
through.
it with a smile, positive attitude to get through. Courage,
Nice.
strength of character, persistence.
Right on. Yeah, I think those are all tough to measure sometimes, right? You know, but definitely it's sort of, okay, I think those terms resonate, right? They mean something. Excellent. Thank you, guys. I'm going to add this. So thank you. So here's maybe a time then, and we can include your language. Please, you know, yell it out when we need to. But let's add then, let's make this some common language that we can use so we have a deeper understanding when we're using this in our systems, right? I can always remember a time in the clinic. So as an integrated behavioral health person in a clinic, that means if a child comes in, I'm available for a warm handoff, right? So perhaps a child comes in, he's been having stomach aches. A doctor's done an exam and says, you know what? I heard a little bit about, you know, he's a little reluctant to go to school. There's some bullying going on. This might be anxiety. And then they would send me in, right? And so I know at one time, you know, after we first begun using the ACEs screener, I had a physician say to me, oh, you're going to want to go in there, you know, ACE number probably about a 6. And while he didn't have time, and we didn't have time in that moment for him to sort of tell me what he meant by that, I was heartened by the fact that it had pinged his radar, right? He's recognizing that there was some trauma or something going on there that could use a wider way of looking at a more expansive view of like, how are we going to figure out how we can best support that person? So obviously using ACEs when we're talking about early childhood adversity and trauma and its impact on development, right? I would like to avoid pathologizing this and stepping away from the medical model as much as possible when we're talking about how might this have shaped their brain. And then using those benevolent childhood experiences and positive childhood experiences for when we're moving into how are we going to build healing and resilience, promote grit, tenacity, perseverance, positive attitude, all of those, right? So really they're two sides of the same coin, right? I would never want to, at this point, I shouldn't say never. I would be very careful to ever be, if I'm talking about trauma and ACEs, and not also at the very same time be talking about in a strength-based way, benevolent childhood experiences and positive childhood experiences and protective factors, right? So we really want to have that balance there. There is some data coming out, it's limited right now, that possibly shows it doesn't really matter, you know, their ACE number, what their score is, how many, in as much as it matters that they had these protective factors, right? That they're that powerful. So that is something to hold on to. And I'm looking forward to more data coming from that. So positive childhood experiences, some of you might have used a screener that is around this, but this was a study, I think first published in 2019, where they studied, you know, they had a list of 7 positive childhood experiences. We're going to get into it. And they noted that those adults that were able to have a higher score there had a lower likelihood of depression or other mental health struggles in adulthood, and that they were able to form positive relationships. And I always want to just stop and think, like, really, that's the work of our life, right? Having relationships, positive, connected, I feel belong, seen, heard, validated relationships, right? And then the benevolent childhood experience, which also was coming out at about the same time, had a list of 10 questions that they thought could be useful in helping us get a better understanding of some of those strengths and what's going right, what is going well in this family and child's world right now. So again, 10 of these benevolent experiences in the BCEs and 7 in the PCEs. We got to find a way to use less of these phrases, but we're not quite there yet. So I don't know. I was psyched when I came upon this, because I was like, oh my gosh, now I have something, right? I have like a tool. It's not a diagnostic tool, but I've got some sort of screener that's been analyzed and validated that can help me figure out what am I supposed to be asking? What am I doing? So here it is. I put it in here and we can add it to the chat, but I'm going to pull it up. But that you can look at the questions, look at the actual questionnaire that was designed, as well as the positive childhood experiences, and as well as the resilience questionnaire. I don't know if any of you have used that one in your work before or seen that too. There's like kind of a trifecta of wonderful things. But here we go. Let's take a look at this. And of course, I intended for us to be able to work in smaller groups and take a moment to do this. So we're going to spend some time together to look at it. But it's simply like, you know, similar to the ACEs screener, right? Growing up, you're just going to respond yes or no. But let's look at sort of the quality and the flavor of the questions, right? At least one caregiver with whom you felt safe, at least one good friend, beliefs that gave you comfort. And there I'm always thinking about, you know, our value-based work, you know, that we do in our schools, you know, in many of our social emotional learning curriculums. Did you enjoy school? You know, sometimes when I look at families, you know, not only is their child not having a great experience at school, you can go back one generation and find out the parents didn't have a great experience in school either. And with good reason, you know, they are hesitant to engage with you, you know, with good reason. Did you have at least one teacher that cared? I love this question. Did you have good neighbors? You know, what was your neighborhood like? You know, who did you have around you? You know, did you have another adult, not that one, number one, but another adult you could turn to? What did you do to have a good time? What did you like doing? What do you like doing right now? And this one is kind of cool, right? Ability to like yourself or feel comfortable with yourself. You know, when you think of all the different ways we show up in the different sort of personas we put on, and when I think of them as sort of defense mechanisms, I don't think of that as a negative way. This is just the way we have to get through our world. These are just ways we get through it. But, you know, could you find yourself when you had to? You know, were you comfortable with yourself and on some primal level? And then here's one, you know, obviously very dear to our hearts and one that's kind of easy to ask. What was your home like? Was it, you know, did you have a predictable home routine? And none of these questions are ever, you know, meant to arrange to find some way to shame or blame any caregivers or any family unit. It's just, you know, what's going on here, you know, that might be getting in the way of you having this. So I'd love to take a moment with people right now and either in the chat, or I would love to hear someone else's voice. If any of those are questions you are routinely asking students right now, if they pop up in your reset team or in some sort of template you use or anything, I'd love to know.
I'll speak out. Sorry, I have my little ones homesick with me, so you'll probably get other speakers as well. So with that, I was just thinking, so I support some of our districts in their suicide prevention work that they're doing, and Sources of Strength is one of the platforms used in doing prevention work, and their program is specifically focused on like healing, hope, and strength. And so that's been a lot of our suicide prevention work, is just like, how do you root your practices in like healing, hope, and strength? And so while these questions aren't necessarily used, I think that is one, and watch that works really well when it comes to any type of that, you know, like mental health campaign, suicide prevention, and just destigmatizing type of work. So I've seen it done in a really effective way, and I'm all for it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Lane. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, centering, you know, the healing and you know, strength-based and positivity without getting into sort of like that fake toxic positivity that we avoid. But, you know, just recognizing, you know, man, you were sitting here in front of me, you know, tell me how you came to this place where you're sitting here in front of me and you're telling me your story is just so integral to that healing and that journey, right? Anybody else want to talk? Or I see lots of things popping along in the chat, which I can't actually see, but I see the number.
I think the first response to your question looked like no. The next person asked, what do we do when we don't have these? Which I thought was a really good question.
It is a really good question. And this is just a free tool that you can access off the internet, and you could certainly, you know, arrange it or embed it into your conversations, you know, when you meet with a student or with a family, And maybe just take one or two of the questions that you feel could be most helpful to you to understanding, right? What might be coming up for that student, or why they might be, coming from a place of compassion on why is this happening the way it's happening right now, right? And helping us, get curious around that. Often in my interviews, I always lead with, what do you do for fun, right? What do you do for a good time? Tell me about this. And can you do it right now? So thank you. That's a good question. And so, yeah, we do have the tool embedded here in our little PowerPoint.
Lauren, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Lauren, I think it was Lauren. Yeah, here we are. Appreciate the framing of traumatic experiences in this discussion, and that she needs to hop off, and also says thank you to you and all. Someone else said this reminds them of dependable strengths, focusing on positive experiences. Looks like in a juvenile court, we have a risk assessment tool that asks them these questions. I think these questions need to also have context. If you ask this, make sure you're able to continually work with the young person and provide a warm handoff. I ask how important is school to them, and who they can go into school when they need help.
Love it. Great questions.
Yeah.
Should I keep going? Own. Yeah, keep going.
All right. Let's see. Since returning to school, I have been asking students what they feel good about when they think of the past year and a half, what got them through the virtual school and or family stress, etc. It looks like I may have misinterpreted someone's comment earlier. I'm sorry. No, what I meant I meant what to do when the student shares they don't have BCEs. I'm sorry. That's a good question. Yeah.
That is a good question.
Definitely make sure you're there for the warm handoff on that one. Since returning to school, I have been asking students what they feel good about when they think of the past. Did I read that one already?
You did, but it was worth repeating. Thank you.
Thank you. We use the Flourishing Life questionnaire that asks many of these questions on a scale rating. It works really well because it gives us a great assessment on the strength and weakness of each youth. Okay, so wait there.
That's true. Fantastic. Now we're all going to have to get curious about the Flourishing Life scale.
I'm going to see if I can find a link.
Okay, thank you. Whoa. Yeah, so we're not doing the breakout group, obviously, but you guys obviously noticed looking at this that, how would you, if you ask these questions, how are you going to continue to re-engage with that student and make sure that these aren't just, a one-off question. I'm like, okay, I got the information, let's go. And so how would you take these questions in and help them lead to meaningful interactions? And then I'm always curious, like, how does it feel for us to ask these questions, especially to the point of, what if they just answer nothing, nobody, no one, can't think of anything good going on. I just know, and I love that question, that idea of like, to stop this person and just think back in your head, what comes up for you, can you think of a time where you did feel good or accepted or a feeling of belonging in your school community? So that's a lovely way that could be another one you could do if you've gotten a lot of don't know, don't care, it's not happening for me type response. Although I would say I have not, definitely we've moved away from using this word kids are attention seeking, but kids are a connection seeking, right? But I have had everybody seems very eager to want to talk, right? From our grown-ups to our littles, they want to talk, they want to connect, they want a sense of belonging, they want to feel safe and in a relationship. So if there's ever a time right for doing all this, this would be it, right? I take a moment then, and then we'll reflect again, and we'll take a moment to look at the chat. But here are 7 items that they asked in the positive childhood experiences that kind of have a different little flavor, right? Were you able to talk with your family about your feelings? There are lots of different cultures that's also needs to be looked at very culturally. Like, what does that mean within your family? Did you feel that your family did stand by you during difficult times? do you enjoy participating in community traditions? You know, do you have a community that you feel like you belong to and that you participate in? Do you have a sense of belonging in high school? And of course, we could change that for any school. Do you have those supportive friends? And again, this is very similar to the other question about 2 non-parent adults. And if you have at least one parent that or in one adult that you felt safe and protected with. So what do you think? So much wisdom in this group. It's exciting.
I have a question about specific numbers. There's statistics, 5+ ACEs, blah, 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 blah. I'm wondering with the BCEs, if there's a number, like if you have 3 out of these, however many, that you're that much more likely to, that'll help with resilience, that kind of thing.
Right. That's really good question. I mean, I have not seen that in the research literature that I've reviewed. And it is really helpful, right? Because the ACEs screener has gotten pretty specific about, when we tried to apply it to groups, especially when I know we were looking at applying it to our school communities. This idea of 4+ is kind of your cutoff, where you are at significantly higher risk for emotional or physical health challenges. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they've come up with a magic number that says 3 is going to get you enough protective factors to balance out 6, if they've done the algorithm or the math on that yet. I will do some research on that and find out. I will make a note. Thank you. Anything else in the chat that we should share?
There are some resources in the chat. Looks like the link to, I can't remember, the Flourishing Life questionnaire.
Oh, thank you.
Lane shared a text version of a document that Zoom won't let her actually share. And there's a link to Dependable Strengths from UW as well.
Wonderful. Great. And again, I think your guys, all the points are really valid. That why are we using these? What are we hoping to identify? What is the purpose if we're going to ask these questions? What's the outcome? What's the point of this? To me, it's always the same thing as when we were asking the ACE, and I know there's some real hesitancy, and there still is within medical community homes, to asking this, because if we ask, we have a moral obligation then to be able to do something, right? You can't just take this information and then not go forward with it. So I would think if we hold that in mind, for the same way we're going to apply these questions, any of them that feel useful, or if you want to do the whole validated tool, how you want to use it. But the idea is that we take this and move it into some way where it can be used reliably within our systems, right, of support. So again, I think it gives us another way of avoiding, sort of that cynicism or, secondary trauma fatigue, when we're in the face of listening to a lot of these difficult stories. In that it gives us this idea that, okay, all right, there's some information coming to me that says, this can really counter, the experiences this family or this child might be going through right now or did go through, right? So I think, again, as we were all focusing sort of very much strength-based, right? Let's have intentional ways that we can address this and bring benevolent childhood experiences into their lives. That those don't have to be just left to the vagaries of their environment or other systems that are impacting them, right? We can build the system to produce the BCEs within this. And again, it gives us a way, kind of when you're thinking about that child that possibly might just say, yeah, I don't have any of these things right now. I can't think of anything positive, right? We always say, right, feelings aren't facts, and feelings come and go, right? We know how quickly they go, even though in the moment they feel like they are the only thing going on. But maybe that could, this idea, if we think of it in an expansive view, it could give us that way to weather some of those ups and downs. Often we reflect back to someone like, what did you do in the past? When you found yourself in a similar situation, what helped? What helped you there? So this could give us another way to frame that and really keep track of that, right? I think of, times where you might be feeling a little untethered or ungrounded in your work. Sometimes, I'll go and do something that I feel competent in, right? And it can be something as basic as, cleaning the kitchen counters, but that is something I've done well. I've completed it. And in a way, it just says, okay, I can do that. Maybe I can do something else. So always want to, again, emphasize, never underestimate your power. We've all heard those amazing and meaningful stories of, that it was the one bus driver that took an interest in me that helped me get through middle school when I was about to drop out. So we know everyone has this ability to be a protective factor in a child's life, right? Everybody. And I think right now I'm hoping, as we kind of reimagine our world after the pandemic, we do turn our lens and our view to this idea that we are interdependent. We have neighbors and churches and community events and places that we can all intentionally build those positive relationships with children. And again, we're going to have lifelong impact, right? To counter the ACEs that they might have experienced or early adversity. So this idea that they can be neutralized, I kind of like. I like this idea that we can take some of the power out of them, right? But by powering up and loading the benevolent and positive experiences. So, if you want to, you could take the 10 BCEs, the 7 PCEs, and come up with 17 questions to counter the 10 ACEs screener. You could uniquely design it how you like, along with the flourishing life. And it sounds like some other screeners you guys are using. And then take what is useful for you. And again, using that context of your community, what you know about your people in your school, in your setting, and how it's going to be helpful, right? Again, it's strength-based, whole child, holistic, and comprehensive. I think we cover a lot with these, and I'd love to look at the flourishing life questionnaire as well. So again, right now, as we enter into, as we're receiving students back from the pandemic, and we're just wondering, gosh, what has it been like for them? I think this is a great place to start. It gives you an entry point that shows you're curious, you're engaged. It puts the emphasis on you tell me what works for you, right? Tell me your strengths, tell me what you enjoy doing. Tell me why that's your best friend. What do you guys like doing together? How does that work? And just really leveraging that, right? To the point where we can take it and use it, in our school system. I think right now, all of us, again, referencing Chrissy's opening speech about seeing this kind of globally, children all coming in struggling with what we could decide to say are regressive behaviors, right? Or we could just recognize, it's been a tough 20 months and we haven't practiced some of these emotional skills for a while. We need some emotional relationship muscle built back up. And so then how could we use these really to build a felt sense of safety, right? If we are prioritizing what this looks like. I was sitting in a preschool classroom the other day, and the little one has just had obviously no preschool experience, just turned 4, but during the pandemic had not been able to access it in person, being raised by grandparents and having a great time out there, but definitely just, kind of enjoying a free range childhood, and very much puzzled and baffled by the school routines and schedules and the needs of the other tiny humans in his class, right? And I noted he had a bit of a tussle over some blocks and had to be, kind of gently escorted over to this area to be safe. And as he sat with his teacher, he leaned into her, he turned sideways and just kissed her shoulder that he could reach right there. And I thought, oh my goodness, look at him. And teacher was, of course, very calm herself. She had practiced her co-regulation. No one had gotten enraged or agitated or activated except for the child. And it was so lovely to see. And so I have so much hope that this is happening in so many ways, on the ground right now. So what I'm thinking when I think about, how do I go into school and use this? How will this be helpful? One, like get familiar with the screening tools, right? How could you share them with other staff members? Are we doing Zoom, parent nights? Could you share them with parents? This is the way we're thinking about people right now, and including each other. Making sure that we've got protected time to promote your social emotional learning curriculums. It sounds like you guys are all doing that. And we all know it isn't just that 35 minutes you get, it's woven throughout the day. And I'm seeing that everywhere I go, that people are like, oh gosh, let me help you right now. It feels like what I'm seeing is you're having some anger or frustration, and I hear that intentional language. I love student mapping. I love the idea. Anytime we're talking about someone who might have bubbled up or pinged the radar of somebody, who does this student already connect with within your school? Is there someone that knows, this family or knows this student more intimately than anybody else? It's to the point where, I hear from staff, well, I kind of know what he likes because he wears a Minecraft t-shirt every single day. So I'm able to kind of communicate with him there, and he's starting to kind of warm up to me. I love it, just being aware of all those little cues that we could look for. So yeah, talking about benevolent childhood experiences, as much as we talk about ACEs, can we please talk about the positive protective factors that we are able to control and promote and build? And I think all of this keeps us out of landing in a judgmental place. Not that happens, but at least when it happens, we're aware it's happening. Like, oh, what is happening in me right now that I'm feeling this way? Let me think back and let me take a moment to be self-reflective and self-aware. And then we can all join in on that community, being empowered to heal themselves, right? The wisdom is all there. It's in the community. So obviously we're going to be able to mitigate, this, as long as we are able to hold this, keep this lens at the forefront, top of mind. I love this little saying, belonging to be accepted and affirmed in their truth is the same for everyone. And, this is just beyond science. It's like, how were you loved? And that to me speaks directly to that felt sense of safety. How did I feel loved? And how can I turn that outward to the people I'm working with? This is Dr. Bruce Perry, who is one of our neurodevelopmental pediatricians who is foundational in the understanding of trauma experiences and recovering from trauma. And I would encourage you, to do a little research around him or kind of access his most recent publication with Oprah Winfrey. But I love this idea that, we don't need to pathologize, what's going on when we can recognize that they're coming from a space that that might have been terrifying, right? And so it's a very predictable outcome to what they have lived. And then that we all just take that time to get to know each individual child and really understand why they're acting the way they are. If any of you are already listening to this podcast, this is Brene Brown, of course, but there's a nice episode where Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Perry discuss their new book. And again, with the understanding that adverse childhood experiences and trauma continues to be a very, lots of different views on how we look at trauma and ACEs. It continues to be hotly debated in many circles. But if we boil it all down today to ACEs as being a felt sense of danger to a child or person, and benevolent childhood experiences, a felt sense of safety, then we can really take a moment to recognize if a child feels safe, he's going to be able to settle in, right? And be curious and explore his world and be open to whatever learning we're trying to promote here. People that don't feel safe, they can't take the chance on new things, right? It's too threatening, right? But people who feel safe, they go out and explore and invent and are creative and want to find out new possibilities. So again, if we have an environment where there is a lot of predictability and processes, and you have a felt sense of who you are in relation to other people, you're going to feel very, your brain is going to be very aligned with like, let me find out what else I can do, and if not, if you come from a place where you have had that adversity and did not have that felt sense, you're going to shut down, right? You're not going to take the chance of being curious. And you're not going to have the energy or bandwidth, right, to pay attention to anything except what might be activating your sense of danger. Again, it's going to all be about relationships. Those relationships are the agent of change, right? So questions, all those questions to me in the BCE and the PCE are just reflecting like who's been close to you? How have you been connected? How have you been protected, even in the face of adversity, right? And that's where we want to pay attention. And I think when our schools and our society and community can hold both those things, right? Understand and recognize trauma and identify it when it's there, and understand those protective factors that we can help create and build and strengthen, that's where we're going to see real change. Again, think about using that screening tool as a way to offer support. Really think about times where you have always had a felt sense of safety, and what is the quality of those relationships? Why is that? I hope you all have relationships where you have a deeply felt sense of safety. And just know this is not quick work, right? Again, I think about how our society, we just run on warp speed 12, it's like we got to get it done. This is an emergency. This is what needs to be done right now, and hustle, hustle, hustle. We can step out of that, right? Because to be able to do this in a meaningful way, in a genuine, authentic way to show up, you can't push it through, right? It's going to be slow, rewarding work, right? And it's obviously bi-directional. We grow and get out of it as much as anyone else within it. So I think this is the end of our time together. So grateful for all of you that showed up. And obviously I'm going to be able to take a time to go through the chat and see what else I need to look at. But feel free to reach out and email me if you want anything I can provide for you. I would be happy to do that. Do we need to address anything in the chat right now?
No, you got a positive shout out. Real quick, there's a survey that we'd love everyone to do, but before I get in trouble, because I forgot to say it, I'll paste it in the chat. We'd love for you to do that. I am not someone who adheres closely to time just inherently. So I am happy to keep this room open for as long as folks would like. If anyone wants to hang out and chat, do follow-up questions, tell me what a terrible job I did, any of that, I will be here. Mary, you are not under any obligation to stay longer than you'd like, but I really would like to thank you for this awesome presentation, your flexibility, filling out that long RFP, everyone who's in attendance here. Shouts to my planning committee, because like I say to them at every meeting, anytime I'm in charge of anything, the less I do, the better. So if this conference has been a success, it's because I've had a whole bunch of help getting things right. Thank you all. The survey link is in the chat, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mary, or anyone else. And if you have trouble unmuting, let me know.
Okay, thank you so much for your facilitation and co-facilitation and being such an awesome team member. So thank you so much. And so we can
Thank you. There was a question in the chat. Oh, I'm sorry, go for it.
Oh, sorry. Mary, can you tell me again the book that Oprah helped write? Who was the doctor?
It's
what?
Dr. Bruce Perry.
Bruce, how do you spell the last name?
Perry.
Oh, Perry. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. I'm interested in checking out that book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank
read.
you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think it was Kim, I don't know if she's still on, asked about if anyone uses warrants. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong screen. Do you have any thoughts on warrants? Because what I was kind of thinking was, and I'm surprised I didn't notice this before, but it seems like there's some parallels with the questionnaires if you're familiar with it, which probably
Yes.
was intentional.
Yeah, and I don't know, what people are, using, and that it just, again, it feels like there's so many, we're so fractured around this. There's so many different tools and different screeners and ways in to support that. We don't really have I would love to have some coherency around this, right? Some sort of way. So I don't know.
Yeah, this is Kim. I am still on here. And I'm
Thank you, Kim.
interested because I've also been asked to be on the Warrens committee for a grant from WSU that they're doing, but I haven't used it in the last couple of years for obvious reasons.
Right.
But when I have used it, it's been like super, super helpful, as long as you don't just do it and say, okay, we did it and now we're off to truancy court. I like the Warrens and the fact that it breaks it into categories, but people, I'm like the only one that's been using it. People just, it doesn't seem to be very user friendly, or schools not wanting to really use it. I think they'd rather almost prefer just a pen and paper, but.
Yeah, I think you're touching on, part of some of the difficulties. Yeah, I have not seen the warrants used around the districts that I'm in here in ESD 105, but I haven't intentionally asked either. So I could find out if that was something they've used in the past or what their experience is with it. And I like the way you added, of course, it can't just be the one thing you fill out and then you did it because you did it,
Yeah, it'd be great if we did know kind of how many people are using it, and we could kind of have a support group with one another.
Y'all know they are presenting tomorrow.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. So I'm anxious to see how
Yeah.
tomorrow goes.
They're always open to suggestions and questions too. So I like to go in there and give them ideas if I, I studied humanities. So, but.
Yeah, totally. Actually, a couple of years ago in Ellensburg, I was one of the panelists that sat up on the stage in Ellensburg, and talked about the use of it. And for me, like I said, it's great. I love it, but I can't get buy-in from other schools in my district. It doesn't really seem like. So maybe I need to just sit down and do a training with them, and I'm just curious what other schools are doing.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, Kim, this is Erin. I was on that same panel with you, and we use it in Everett, and all of my buildings use it. So maybe you and I can connect sometime.
Hi, Erin. I do. I remember you. Thank you. That would be awesome.
Yeah. So let's get in touch.
Okay. Thank you so much. See what these things do? They just network us with one another, everybody.
So powerful. We got to connect. It's collective work now, right? It's community care.
So I am Naomi. I work with the Moses Lake District. We also use warrants, and it's kind of something that we have contributed into one of our requirements prior to the schools referring over to our truancy boards.